Prices of vintage watches are up, there is no doubt. But the debate as to whether or not vintage watches are overpriced will continue. Let's do it. What is up, Watch fam, and welcome to this week's episode of Rent TNH. Today, we're going to be doing a bit of a change my mind episode.
A bit of one.
A bit of one. I am Christian from Theo and Harris.
And I'm Anna from Theo and Harris.
I do all the curation of the vintage watch shop.
And I do everything else.
Very good.
Just kidding, I know.
There's
also Aaron, and there's Jen, and there's Michael. And
yes.
We love our team.
Yes, but it's funny that you went to just name everyone else that's on the team.
Not him.
But not me.
Not good.
Quick wristwatch check. I'm wearing a Tiffany Rolex GMT Master, the one that I almost just scratched on the table, but I did not because I hit it against the wood. And you are wearing what, Anna?
A Tudor Date Day.
Love that
blue
one.
Dial, gorgeous. It's in basically perfect condition.
The blue is pretty close to my date dress. Not the same, but it's pretty close.
It is.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the berry.
The way that blue dials explode in the light is insane. So today's conversation, the change of my mind here, is addressing very real concerns or very real criticisms, not about Theo and Harris, but about the vintage watch world, period. Mm-hmm. And it's very simple. Vintage watches are overpriced. That's an argument that, although not held by very many, it's really not. People speak loudly, but it's really not. People who really know that's ridiculous.
I think it's easy to have that opinion from the outside too.
Absolutely.
That's probably the most common. Like, well, why are you paying so much?
Right.
Yeah.
And the reasoning behind this this opinion is very simple.
Yeah.
Anyone who has been vaguely in touch with watches for the last really 2 years, even, they can witness some of this. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, the more years, the more models and examples you can have, has witnessed extreme rise in price.
Yeah, I mean, look at the Datejust, right? Which a couple years ago was selling for like $1,500.
Yeah, Datejust maybe 6 years ago was a $1,500 watch.
And now it's in the threes, fours,
and one that no one wanted. It was a $1,500 watch no one wanted.
I can't even believe that.
Yep, it's the truth.
That's amazing.
And then
before I was into watches.
Yep. And then when the vintage watch world had a resurgence, the Datejust spiked for many reasons. Mostly because people realized the value in the Datejust. So now they trade at double plus what they used to trade at.
Yeah.
So people that have saw them and remember them at $1,500, they're like, this is the $1,500 watch. It's 38. Yeah, okay. Go tell somebody else.
I mean, look at your dad's GMT, right? He got it 12 years ago for like $3,800, and we told this story before on the channel. But $3,800 like 12 years ago, and now he could probably sell it for 12.
Oh yeah,
that's quadruple the 3 times to 4 times the price.
Absolutely.
That's crazy. And it's the same watch. And if anything, it's just gotten older. It's gotten slightly dinged up. Yeah, he takes very good care of it. But
you're right.
It's gotten dinged up. It's older now. Like, it's very easy to say, what the hell's going on here? Like, what, as these things get used more, they become worth more. That seems completely counterintuitive.
So to name a few more, just to add validity to the opposing kind of perspective here, look at vintage Pateks, even at the bottom level. You have the reference 96. It's a 30 millimeter watch. It was produced in many metals, including steel even. A watch that you really couldn't sell not that long ago. A watch that was, when I got into vintage watches, a $4,000 to $6,000 watch. Now they're $9,000 to $60,000, depending on the metal and the dial configuration. A steel, Breguet, 96 could be worth, tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Again, depending on condition. This is crazy from the outside. But it's our opinion, as it's not just ours, as is the opinion. We're voicing our opinion, but it's a shared opinion with anyone that really knows watches, or is able,
just an explanation,
right, to kind of like take a step back and really look at what's going on here. And I want to hear your guys' opinion, truthfully, because most of my opinion, particularly on this matter, has really been formed by hearing others. I didn't know anything about Banksy selling for these big dollars before I got into watches and heard other people talk about it. I want to hear your perspectives. It would be amazing for us, for our opinions to kind of not just stay static, right, but to develop as they have so much in the last couple of years. But please comment your opinion.
Well, the first argument to this really is then, in the 90s, earlier, when these watches were worth, half
Fractions.
or fewer fractions of the prices that they're selling for now. They were underpriced, right? And that comes from several things. Watches were not appreciated in a global way like they are now, especially mechanical watches, especially vintage watches. There were no blogs. There were no people, on social media sharing their watches and sharing these opinions. Those communities really hadn't formed yet. Right?
It comes down to exposure. There was no
and
vintage
appreciation. There wasn't appreciation for
There
it.
was no vintage watch community at scale. Of course, there have been small groups of people that have been collecting watches, particularly uber wealthy people for 100 years.
Yeah, it's
right?
insane.
This has always been going on. But the world, normal people who don't live and breathe watches, didn't start collecting watches until fairly recently.
Yeah.
That's a big difference. Hodinkee, arguably the most influential force in the repopularization of vintage watches, period, only came about 8 years ago? 10 years ago. 10 years ago. I mean, and really only became rock stars, 7 years ago, 6 years ago. So you're talking about the rebirth. Who's been recent. And yes, in that rebirth, there are models that have become overpriced. I personally think some Paul Newmans are ridiculously priced. I don't see a justification if a standard Daytona is worth 50 grand. I don't see a justification for 10x.
Yeah.
Or 20x,
Right.
I can see 4 or 5 or 6, again, this gets abstract, gets very complicated, a watch is worth what, people are willing to pay, of course.
Well, I think the point is there are, very specific examples that don't necessarily obey this rule that we're talking about.
Absolutely. But I put the question right back on the accuser. Do you really think that it's fair to say the true market value of something, is happening when no one even knows these things exist?
Yep.
It doesn't make any sense.
Also, 90s and earlier, right? I mean, like Datejusts that were made in the 60s and 70s, which now
They're also new.
Exactly. Well, they were just old.
Yeah,
they were just like 10 years old. It was like, I want a 10-year-old watch, and now it's like, oh wow, it's still running. It's keeping great time. It looks beautiful. Blah blah blah. But then it was like in the 80s. It was like, why do I want to watch from 12 years ago?
Right.
Like,
it's like a Porsche, like a 9-year-old Porsche is kind of weird. I mean, I would love to drive a 9-year-old Porsche, but a 9-year-old
like,
Porsche.
What is the threshold for vintage? What's the threshold for like this is cool and like something that should be appreciated and valued in a different kind of way than you'd appreciate a brand new one.
I think the second point here comes down to comps. Comps create a market. I think it was Matt Bain that said, 1 watch is a sale, 2 watches is a pattern, 3 watches is a market, right? But the point is, in the watch world, period, right? What do you get for $5,000? What do you get for 2? What do you get for 10? Right? So when you compare a vintage watch to that, you can start to get an idea, okay, I'm getting less or I'm getting more than I would get anywhere else. Mm-hmm. I personally think, for example, going back to the Datejust, the watch that we probably know better than any other watch, out there.
For sure.
A Datejust, let's call it a $3,000 to $4,000 watch. Usually there are Datejusts in the 10s and 20s and 40s, but a $3,000 to $4,000 watch on average. What market is it competing in? It's competing against Bell & Ross. It's competing against Breitling. It's competing against a lot of, and nothing wrong with those watches. Some of them are great. I own a Breitling Super Ocean Heritage. I love it very dearly, but we have to look at the watches for the material, or for the R&D that's gone into them. These are watches that are powered by ETA movements, by and large. These are mass-produced watches. When I said mass-produced, I didn't just mean in quantity, but I meant how they're produced. They're produced entirely, kind of by assembly line machine, kind of. I mean, yes, there are hand elements, but these are not artisanal pieces. These are not craftsmanship watches. These are good watches, reliable watches. But if you really look at the grand scale of everything, there's nothing truly special about them. A lot of them are reissues and so many other things. With a vintage Datejust at the same price point, you're getting something that is, 1, produced by arguably the most important watch brand ever, right? 2, a watch that is just as reliable and a watch that is just as accurate. The difference in timekeeping is negligible. The movements themselves were developed in-house, and you can't even compare the quantity of examples out there. Every Breitling Super Ocean Heritage out there is in basically the same condition. It's a watch that has been made, very recently. They're all good. They're all basically the same. Again, love mine. Not dissing you Super Ocean Heritage guys out there. Love you guys. But they are the same. Right? A vintage Datejust, finding a truly great example is hard. And so many of them have these little nuanced differences that separate them from the pack.
Yeah.
right? So that's kind of what we're talking about. And you can apply the same principle of evaluating what the market, brings at a certain price point and putting this watch there to see how it competes against its brothers and sisters.
And the last variable here is collectability. I mean, these watches, while yes, certainly are appreciated by, our group and by like the vintage watch community that does appreciate them.
Which is larger now than it was 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
But still.
Much more widely appreciated now than they used to be, even 10 years ago. It still hasn't hit any sort of mainstream attention yet that it absolutely could. I mean, just look at the Paul Newman, like the most groundbreaking watch sale really that we've ever seen.
The biggest news in wristwatches ever.
$18 million for Paul Newman's Paul Newman.
Yep.
And that's really nothing. It's fractions of what, big art.
Or even middle of the line art, like you see
well,
art auctions. No, what I'm saying as far as not
Price.
quality, but I mean in the auction world,
right.
It's like people make a joke. Okay, great, XYZ auction house can bring in $18 million in a weekend, and then you have the art auction that brings in $890 million. And that's a big number, but north of $200 million,
right.
Like it's no problem. It's not a big deal at all.
Exactly.
Where vintage watches are now is huge progress. But to ignore the fact that we are still at basically the ground level of really a new collectible medium is insane.
And watches now do deserve to be compared to that because they're kind of treated like art pieces.
Yeah,
there are
so
it is a valid comparison.
There are differences, but from a collectability standpoint,
yeah.
I absolutely agree that they're not the same, but they are similar. There's a lot more commonality than there's given credit for right now. Mm-hmm. I think that's what Philips is doing. It's so important. Yeah. I think that Philips's big goal is not the next sale. Philips's big goal is 10 years from now to have been the pioneer that took watches from just watch people to introducing it to the real world of collectability, of auction, of rarity, of people appreciating them, as opposed to a wealthy person looking at a watch and saying, no, I have an Apple Watch. Someone like Arlo Box, for example, I can see how it would be kind of a goal for really no collector of fine items, of fine, like I said, art or other historical memorabilia, to not have a great watch. And so many of them don't.
Yeah.
They don't really mean that much yet. So no, vintage watches are not overpriced. Some are, definitely. There are anomalies out there, but by and large, the vintage watch market is just beginning. And yeah, it's really convenient for us, the retailers that got in fairly early. That'll be a score one day, right?
Yeah.
But it's also a huge score for you guys because you, the viewers, people who are on YouTube looking up vintage watches, are still living in a time which, yes, they are expensive and yes, they do cost more than they did. But I think that if you're going to look back in 3 or 5 or 10 years or sometimes in 6 months, depending on the watch, and say, shit, they were right. Teenage was right. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Rant Teenage.
If you like this video, subscribe to our channel. We have 3 videos a week. Yeah. And if you like this video, let us know. And if you want us to cover a topic that you're interested in, please comment below. We'd love to get you guys engaged.